Welcome to the Ethics Experts, where we're elevating ethics and compliance and HR to the strategic level it's supposed to be.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Ethics Experts. I'm your host, Gio Gallo, co-CEO of Compliance Line, and we're excited to bring you this show today. We got a great guest for you today. Byron Earnheart is joining us from North Mississippi. Byron, welcome to the show, man.
Hey, Giovanni, great. I'm glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, sure. Glad you're here. So want to welcome everyone to the show. Thanks for being here. I appreciate you guys tuning in and listening or watching us. And if you are a subscriber, I just want to say super glad that you're joining us today. And hey, everyone else who's not a subscriber, that's what you get on the Ethics Experts. If you subscribe, you get an extra special welcome at the beginning of every show. So hit subscribe, share it with your friends, and let's continue to make the world a better workplace. Byron, thanks for joining us today. Super excited to jump in and talk about ethics and banking and a bunch of different topics. Just to start out, this is the Ethics Experts. We tell the personal stories of people in the ethics industry. So tell us your personal story. Tell us your path, your career path, and how you got to where you are today.
Oh, thanks, man. I guess I could say I've always kind of grown up in a bank. My dad, we grew up, the family is he grew up here in the same town that I live in, a little town called Tunica, Mississippi, about an hour south of Memphis, Tennessee, straight down Highway 61. My dad went to work for a bank, but he came back to farm, actually. And he farmed for 1 year with his father and brother. There was a bad cotton prices kind of took a hit, and my mom told him, find a new wife or find a new job. And so he went to work for a bank to, quote, ride the cotton prices out. And after 48 years, he just retired from that bank.
Oh, wow.
Still waiting on the cotton price. Yeah, so
waiting.
We're waiting on the cotton prices to rebound. And so I grew up in a bank the same way that many people grow up in the family business. So I fought it for a while and went to school, University of Tennessee at Knoxville, studied finance. And then I graduated in 2002, right as WorldCom and Enron were starting. And the demand for a financial analyst, at the time you think you could rule the world, the demand was null and void. So I went back to work at the bank to do something in my field. And like my dad, here I am 20 something years later, or 19 years later, still working around banking. So,
okay.
I think as we talked about, really the way I kind of reconcile that with my younger self, I play music, write songs for a little label here in Memphis. And so I always tell myself that I'm a songwriter, a blues guitar player, a solo act that just moonlights as a banker. So that's how I reconcile that with to my younger self.
Yeah.
So I feel better about myself now that I can say that.
Yeah. we got to answer to that younger self and say, hey, what are you doing with your life? And like, this is our life, and here's what we're doing with it.
Exactly. So calm down, 20-year-old Byron. It's cool. Yeah. It's cool. You still bang on a guitar a good bit. So.
And you're still pretty cool, Byron.
I tell myself that there's a funny meme. There's a funny meme. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's the Fines. And there's some of y'all probably don't know who the Fines is, but there's a picture of the Fines and he's all cool. He says, how I view myself. The next one is how my kids view me. And it's Henry Winkler in like ultimate dad gear.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is my life.
Yeah.
This is who I am.
Well, that self-perception is a lot more important than what those kids think. What do they know?
Absolutely. That's what I tell them anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Tell them, what do they know?
Yeah, you don't know anything, boy.
So just as we're getting warmed up here, Byron, tell me a little bit about the Barret School of Banking, what you guys do, what your mission is, and how you guys make an impact.
Yeah, I've been associated with the Barret School kind of around the fringes before I started working for like 17 years of my life, and then went to work for Barret about 4 years ago. And what Barret School is, it's a graduate school of banking. And if you're not familiar with that, what idea is that is typically they're nonprofits that put on a 3-year program that is at the graduate level in terms of the type of content, how deep that content goes into banking. And there's 5 or 6 of us across the country that provide that level of banking education. The thing about Barret is that Barret is the only one that has the largest endowment of any of the banking schools. Paul Barret was a banker in Memphis. He passed away. One of our regents went to the administrator of the trust, hoping to get 5, asking for 5, hoping to get 3. We ended up with 8 million.
Oh,
and so with that, awesome, right?
Yeah.
But what that allows us to do is it allows us to subsidize the cost of our programming to reach out to smaller banks all over the country. And so we provide the same level of education that you could get at another graduate school. A lot of it's the same teachers.
Sure.
But it allows for us to do that at a price point that that helps particularly smaller bankers, given that interest rates are so low, margins are compressed. We can do that. We can help train their bankers. And in terms of like our mission, what we've really tried to do is focus almost exclusively on community banks, those that are in on Main Street, those that are, the corner store bank in little small town America. We do work with some larger banks. Very, very glad to have them because they need the education too. But we've been able to sort of take that mission and take that passion that we have for community banks, and we're the only endorsed graduate school by the ICBA, which is the National Community Banking Trade Association, Independent Community Bankers of America, and also have picked up the endorsement of about 12 state associations all the way from Washington State to Virginia. So we really view ourselves, we've got a passion for community banks, for that local banker that he or she knows their communities, getting involved with it, providing credit, really understanding financial intermediation and how that works in the community, which is really locally focused, but been able to expand that across the country.
Sure.
You could tell we get really fired up about that. So we have in addition to where I think we're coming into with this, in addition to the graduate school, we do a lot of different programming, all the way from teaching, the basic fundamentals of the financial statements to compliance. We're getting ready. As soon as we get off this, I've got to go work on our compliance program. So we work on, we stay in touch and keep our fingers on the pulse of really everything that impacts banking, especially compliance, given that it is such a huge part of the banking industry.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. I love that community bank angle. It's cool because it almost feels like you as a school are a little bit closer to that endpoint impact, right? Like training somebody at a national or international bank that it goes through 18 levels before it gets to, the lender or, the borrower or whatever. You're a little bit closer to that. That's pretty cool. So you said,
and a lot of times those larger banks, some of it's just the practicality of it too, is because those larger banks have their own internal training. Whereas, and you're talking about close to $100 billion bank, right? They're going to be able to afford their own training. $100 million bank, however, does not. And I know those numbers sound big, but they, if you're not familiar with banking, they're not able to afford the level of training maybe that another bank twice their size or 5 times their size, which would still be sort of a small mid-sized bank.
Right.
And quite frankly, there's more of those $100 million banks than there are the $100 billion banks, to be honest. So there's a little bit of a practical side to it as well. But man, it is being able to reach out and work with people who are that many people across the country who are point of the spear working in these communities is really, really cool.
That's
really,
awesome.
really cool. Yeah,
I can tell you're passionate about it, and I love it. We're going to get into some things about ethics and DEI and ESG and stuff like that, but, just to kind of tie it into banking, there's this really interesting point that you brought up about banking that, maybe not more than anywhere else, but, certainly at a high level, ethics is tied into the business. Right.
Sure.
You need to have ethical actions. Reputation is very important. And you said this great thing that, banks hold people's sweat equity, and for them to survive and, serve, they need to be able to hold that and lend that out well throughout the economy. Tell me a little bit about that and how ethics ties into that.
Yeah, I teach banking for a little liberal arts school here in Memphis, and I tell my bankers, you'll hear the idea that compounding interest is like the 8th wonder of the world. I make the argument that financial intermediation is the 9th, and banks are right at the middle of that because we're able to take people's blood, sweat, and tears as represented by their money,
Yeah.
people's paychecks, their savings accounts, things like extra money they have laying around. If they, fortunate enough to have some, they're able to put that money in a bank, feel secure about that. And then the banks are then able to lend that out into building new homes, starting new businesses, buying that student their first car to go to school, helping them buy their first computer to take to school. All those things really only happen because of financial intermediation, which is to not bore your listeners, it's the people that net savers, people that have money, they put money into a bank and the bank lends that out. And so there's somebody in the middle making that happen. So if you think about it in that model, the bank's reputation and the way that the bank as a corporate entity, and quite frankly, the way the reputation that they have, as you all know, that's really hard to build and very easy to blow up. And so it's imperative that a bank maintains a good reputation, acts in ethical manners. And look, I am not Pollyanna about it. There are some bankers out there in this world that don't, and they need to be shut down. And, it would make our industry a lot better, make the economy a lot better. But at the same time, we have to live that way on the individual level as well. What we were talking about before you hit record, it is such a relationship business that if the banker does not have a good reputation in town. Remember, we're dealing with a lot of small town USA here in this, and even in larger cities. If that banker does not have a good reputation, it reflects poorly on them and it reflects poorly on the bank, and therefore financial intermediation is really, really hard to get into. Why would you trust that person?
Right.
Plain and simple. Plain and simple. If they've got a bad reputation, and look, many of them do. If you've got a bad reputation and you were perceived to be sort of the technical term being sleaze bucket, then if you're perceived that way, it's hard to do business, and the public loses their trust in you.
Right.
And that could really impede your ability to do business.
Yeah, I love that you bring it up that way, because I think a lot of times in the GRC or compliance and ethics profession, we're talking a lot about these things from some form of distance, right? We talk about the tone at the top, and we talk about how people perceive compliance, or what it's like when, you send this message out and, broadcast it to 80,000 employees. But at the heart of it is this thing that you're talking about, Byron, where it's a personal reputation, right? And a division in a company can have a reputation. The leader, the leadership, capital L leadership can have a reputation. But at the end of the day, it's a person, right? One of the things I love most about ethics is it's focused on people. This is not moving ones and zeros. This is not, building widgets that, fasteners for a bridge. This is all about people. And at the end of the day, this is about a person making a decision about another person to trust them, or to allow them to lead them, or to follow their direction that, if I do this thing, then it's going to be better for all of us. And what's cool, Byron, is, at that community bank level, those kind of person to organization to combined reputation ties are all still pretty close, right? It's, it may not be exactly this, but it's like, that's so-and-so's bank. It may have a different label on it, but it's this person's bank, and that's the person who's going to make decisions about what happens with my money. And that's really at the core of everything that we're doing. And there's this weird thing going on in our economy and in, industry writ large, where it's almost like it's coming full circle, where it kind of started out, this is kind of my thesis, so beat me up on this if you like, Byron. But, it started out where everyone was in a town, and you knew the candlestick maker and the baker and the shoemaker and, the doctor and all of that. You knew them, you knew their families and all of that. Well, companies have grown, and, companies are going across state lines and across countries, and, some of them are, have GDPs bigger than other countries and stuff. And it kind of got very disentangled, and it was just kind of this facade of like, the big cold logo of the company. But I feel like we're coming full circle where people are like, well, you should be responsible for your actions no matter how big you are. And there are people that are impacted by your actions, and there are also people driving those actions. So that's what I feel like ethics and compliance and GRC and ESG is about, is like putting the human back in these relationships that, whether you pay through an app or you send in a paper check or whatever, it's still about people trusting and interacting with other people.
Yeah, I wouldn't beat you up on that. I wouldn't, not at all. I wouldn't beat you up on that at all. And I know the bankers that are listening to this are probably going to tune out because, bankers, yes, compliance is a huge part of what we do. A lot of times bankers do feel that there's a little bit of overreach in terms of the
Sure.
In terms of the regulation, and they haven't, the regulators have not found a process that they can't infuse with a ton of paperwork,
Yep.
which takes time. I mean, and so look, I'm the first to side with my banking brothers and sisters on, yes, there is definite some overreach that has made the process way more complicated than it needs to be. That being said, there are some regulations that do sort of keep us, that sort of incent banks to act the way like what you're talking about. Things like the CRA, Community Reinvestment Act, that prevents redlining. It makes banks get credit for taking some of their time, their efforts, and their money, reinvesting it back into the community in terms of financial education. I'm a big believer in that. I've seen that work in the lives of my town. We live in a low to moderate income area, and so you've got a lot of need for that. It's the banks leading the way for that. There's a lot, there is a way to dress up a loan with and put in a bunch of fees and dress the interest rate up, that, if there were no regulations like truth in lending, it would make it tempting to do that. So yeah, I think there is room for that. And I like the way you put that in terms of it being about the people.
Yeah.
Because at the heart of it, banking brethren and sister, I understand the feeling you're going to get with this, but it is about the people and protecting them, but also sort of guiding the bank to do the things that need to be done, and providing the rail guards, like in bowling. When I bowl, I have to put the guards up. Providing them to say, look, we all want to get towards the end goal. We all want to do right, but let's put the rails up to keep you out of the ditch.
Yeah.
And so, there is room for it. And again, it can go too far. The paperwork becomes intense, but at the heart of it, that really does get back to making it a people business and interacting with our customers.
Yeah. And I like the way you put that, because listen, a lot of these regulations and the red tape and the forms and all of that, it's a hassle, right? It's just right. How it is. It's a hassle. But, I think there are two sides of it. Some of it like avails some things that are good, right? CRA is a good thing. Let's push that, make it easier for me to say yes to that. And then on the other side, it's, I kind of think of it like these, if I'm a good guy, well, I don't need the regulations because I'm probably not going to, mess somebody over or do something wrong. But it's kind of like, well, if we're part of this community, if we're part of this profession, and some people need these guardrails, I need to kind of agree to those so that the worst people don't make something really bad, right? It's kind of like, if imagine that I were ever to get pulled over for speeding, I would probably be like, well, yeah, but I was doing it safely. You should pull someone else over because they're violating this in a bad way, right? Like, I think we feel that way when we're complying with some of these regulations. Like, I don't need to do this. I don't need you to force me to be honest and have integrity and have ethics, right? There's some of these things that, like, well, you know what? This is kind of unnecessary for me, but we've got to realize that, like, it's got to be kind of, equal across the board, because when that thing happens, it can have a catastrophic impact, not just on the bank and the reputation and their assets, but their lenders and maybe the entire industry, in, how trustworthy people think, bankers writ large are.
Yeah, well, and I think to that point, I think there's, for the banking perspective, that argument that, I don't need this because I'm never going to act unethically, fails to understand. And look, I come from it, so I understand that mindset. But that assumes that your customer knows as much as you do about financial products and financial management and things like that. That's a big assumption, and it's largely not true.
Uh-huh.
So when I was in management, I would tell my bankers and those that were opening up accounts, look, yes, it's a lot of paper. Yes, it kind of is a pain in the you-know-where to sit down and walk somebody through this, but take advantage of that time to build the relationship.
Okay.
They're going to tell you, hey, if Giovanni, yeah, I got all that. I know how interest rates work. Cool. More times than not, they don't know how it works. And if you're the banker that walks them through, to take the time to your point, is why I think it's a great point about compliance and ethics being about the people.
Yeah.
Take the time to do a little education, because the whole content marketing thing that's been going on right now is centered on educating and engaging with our customers, freemium information that helps them out in life. And, that's one of the things I think the millennials have taught us to do, is to that kind of approach. Look, do it at the desk when you're opening up a checking account. When they're talking about look, mortgages are complicated as they can be, even for bankers. When you're at the closing of a mortgage, take the time to walk them through the disclosures and take the time to understand, like, look, when you pay this, your taxes are going to be taken care of. Your insurance, we're going to take care of all that. Oh, more times than not,
or whatever.
More time. And see, escrow is something they don't understand, but you explain it to them and say, hey, look, we're going to help you take care of this. Or, when you explain to them equity, look, this is the first lien, and if you ever need a second lien, we can help. Take the time to educate them, because 9 times out of 10, and that's anecdotal, but 9 times out of 10, they don't know as much as you think they do. They're looking to you as the expert. So those disclosures are a perfect time. Don't blow them off with, you got to sign this, and so my boss doesn't get mad. Take the time to educate them about what's going on. Because most of the time you're not going to get any nobody's going to get any pushback for you actually showing care and time and effort. Nobody's going to push back on that.
Right. That's great. I love how you put that. Take that time, use, whatever you're being quote unquote forced to do through compliance to build that relationship, build and educate your customer, your client, or whoever. That's awesome.
Absolutely.
And, I think that those kind of little deposits, those little actions, end up building reputation and relationship. And we were talking earlier about how important that reputation is, whether it's a massive bank that everyone knows when they see the logo what that means, and has heard seen the CEO on CNBC or something, or the local bank where if you drive 20 miles away no one knows what it is. That reputation is important, right? And you and I were talking a little bit about this concept of like a banker needing to be clean cut as a representation of how trustworthy they are. Not that you have to fit this mold, but you have to deliver some message to the people you work with, whether it's through an ad or, shaking your hand when they walk in the door, that you are a reliable person. Talk to me a little bit about that.
Yeah. And this kind of gets into, a lot of stereotypes that aren't true and probably don't need to be true, but they are.
Okay.
It's why you see a lot of bankers as sort of clean cut, button down people. Not that, and look, I like I said, I'm a songwriter, blues guitar player. I wish I was a rock star at heart. Yeah. But and this isn't a fair statement. I fully admit that. But if people that want to if people are going to put their money and their blood, sweat, and tears into a bank, they tend to feel better if there's a representation that exudes conservative, not political, but not necessarily political, but a conservative, safe. You're not going to go run off to Bermuda with my money. Here it is. Right. Now, not that. We talked about face tattoos, pony, all that. There are people that have ran off to Bermuda with other people's money that look just like me, short hair, button down shirt. Exactly. And there's great bankers with ponytails and tattoos. Yeah, right. So it does not play out.
It's not just the face of it, but you're trying to convey the heart of it.
But you have to convey that, and But what you're conveying is at some level your ethics, your morals, the way you conduct business. Is what's being conveyed in there. Again, any kind of assumption like that is in some ways based on some misunderstandings, but sure, that is sort of the reality of the world too.
Yeah, but ultimately, I think the point of it is you can convey this by the way you answer an email or how
Sure.
you greet somebody at the door or,
Absolutely.
how much, like you said, you take the time to explain this stuff. You're,
Mhm.
like all of that stuff. And it may be the way you tie your tie or whatever it is.
Sure.
But you're trying to convey that, you know what, like we're on the same team. I'm concerned about your well-being. I know how to do my job. I'm a professional at this. And,
Absolutely.
let's do this thing together, whether it's, lending, borrowing, checking, whatever it
Sure.
is.
I like that. Yeah, let's do this thing together. I'm like, let's do this. And it's so reflective of the community, which is why community banking is so important.
Right.
It's so reflective of the community and being able to project that, getting out in the community, going to the football games, going to the soccer games, shopping locally, all that it factors into it.
Sure. So, sticking on that point of reputation, you talked about how potentially, maybe more than the average company or something like that, reputation for a bank is really important because of the potential shocks from macro and the leverage that they have and stuff like that. Talk to us a little bit about this, because I think a lot of people outside of banking see the regulations that are in banking and see all the red tape and think that, maybe it's idiosyncratic or that's just what regulations are. But, this having a reputation as an ethical organization or person may matter more to a bank than other companies, and there may be something for other companies to learn from them on how they handle those things, because there's some of that leverage and macro trends and stuff like that that's at place in any company.
Sure. And I'm glad you said it like that, Giovanni. You look at a bank's financial statement, and I had a lending professor, a lending teacher tell me, it's kind of ironic. Banks are so highly levered just because of the way we account for deposits and loans and things like that. Banks are so highly levered, and yet when we lend people money, we get onto them about their leverage. A little secret of the industry there. But little finance joke for the listeners there.
Oh.
Yeah, sorry about that. But because we are so highly levered, and like I said, I look at financial intermediation as the ninth wonder of the world. Let's take a look at that process, and if it fails, the impact in the economy. So you got a bank in a community, and people are putting their blood, sweat, and tears into that, as represented by the money. That bank is then lending it out and providing credit, and then living on the spread. And that's fundamentally what banking is.
Sure.
If that bank becomes, for whatever reason, perception or justified, viewed to be unethical, just sleaze buckets.
Yeah.
What's going to happen is the people that are putting the money in the bank, they're going to stop or pull, or even worse, pull their money out of the bank. Look what happens from a macro perspective. That there's no credit for small businesses. That impacts paychecks. There's no houses being built. That has a huge impact on the economy. Now multiply it's on and on and on and on. Now multiply that out across 4,000 community banks, 5,000 banks in general across the whole country. Reputation is sort of the strong, and look, it's kind of scary when you think about it. Reputation of the banking industry is sort of one of the glues that sort of holds this whole thing together.
Right.
I don't know if I agree with you that it's important for all companies. It's really important with banking.
Yeah.
It's really, and it has a huge impact at a macroeconomic level. If that's not there, not just to, and look, the Wall Street banks and big banks, when they act, they have their role, and when they act up, crime. But if that reputation is harmed at the industry and even at the corporate level, that has an impact on some economy, and it could be disastrous for everybody.
Yeah. And ultimately, some economy it has an impact on people and their lives and their livelihood and their ability to feed their family or send their kids to college or enjoy the fruits of their labor or whatever it is.
Sure. And even there's a psychological impact. I mean, if I've got my money in one bank, all the blood, sweat, and tears, from my job that I do, the 60, 40, 60, whatever that is, I put my money into a sleaze bucket. I got to go find a new place. Well, how do I do the new place? It's going to be a sleaze bucket too.
Right.
That has some psychological impact, to say nothing of the macro impact.
Yeah. So let's dig a little bit deeper. You and I were talking a little bit about how this concept of diversity, equity, and inclusion and ESG is coming to banks but they're maybe kind of waiting to be led into a little bit more. Tell me kind of what that looks like and what your view on those topics is.
First, my view, I think, is probably it's not too little, too late, but it's long overdue. I'll say for the banks. We have tended to be an industry dominated by white males, older white males. There is, like in any industry, there is a pay discrepancy between largely across the industry, male and female. I am not going to I'm not going to defend what has happened in the past because I think it's wrong.
Sure.
However, we are starting to see that in our regulations, in our exams, that the government is going to start looking at ESG and DEI as part of our lending process, making sure that we're working on and working with ethical companies and lending money to them. Now, what that looks like, we don't know.
Sure.
And then also the way that the bank conducts its own business. We're really waiting on what that looks like. That's a really good idea at the 30,000 foot level.
Yeah.
What does that mean for banks? We really don't know. We're kind of waiting to see what that looks like. Waiting to see, every 2 years we change governments and change regulations, and those that make the rules. So some of that's probably going to have to come after a 22 or 24 election, and then whatever the government looks like at that point. That said, we don't know what that looks like. My guess is, and this is my view only, my view does not represent the banking. I do.
This is not financial advice.
No, this is not financial advice. No, Lord, don't take my financial advice. I think we're going to be having to look at, particularly on the DEI side. I think we're going to have to look at our pay scales, our pay differentials. I think our hiring practices are going to be examined. Definitely need to be in some cases. But not only that, and making sure that we're not only saying the right things, but doing the right things. And look, again, that kind of comes back to your reputation. And, bankers do tend to be pretty, safe, conservative people. And so it kind of comes back to, well, that doesn't apply here. Regardless of whether or not you agree with the regulation. And that's a different argument than the regulations coming, and you got to comply with it anyway. Your opinion on the matter really is interesting, but probably irrelevant.
Yeah.
So I really think I'm beginning to see that happening. So your own politics is great, and understand you do. But those that are making the rules are probably getting ready to change some of those. So it's time to start thinking about your DEI, your ESG, in terms of not only what you're saying, how you're looking at that from the lending side, and what you're actually doing in the bank, and looking at those pay scales, looking at those differentials, and addressing those. And I really wish I had more. And you and I had talked about it before. I wish I had more to say. We're definitely going to be doing X, Y, Z.
Yeah, just wait.
We just hadn't gotten it yet. And so anything that's being talked about is really sort of more at the corporate level, or this is what we think is going to be, but we don't know what that looks like. We don't know what that looks like, but it's coming. And again, like I said, whether you like it or not, it's coming at some level and to some degree. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting perspective, and a lot of industries are dealing with it right now. Like, what does ESG mean? Well, it means environment, social, and governance. But what does it mean for us, right? What are we supposed to do with it? And you're starting to see kind of murmurings, and the SEC has some comments about it, but not strict guidance on it and stuff like that. And it's happening. Well, that's just for public companies. Well, it's going to spread. My thesis is it's going to spread. This need to not just be doing things, not just avoiding getting thrown in jail for malfeasance, but showing that you're doing the right thing by tracking, reporting metrics, and getting better at it. I think that whether it's diversity, equity, inclusion, environment, social governance, that, this is something that's coming out and rolling out with more and more formality throughout the economy. And I think that people, I think that there's potential to, there are kind of a couple layers to it, right? You can just wait until you're forced to do it, or like you're going to get locked up and thrown in jail and your company be shut down. You can wait and get started then. You can take a step into it and say, hey, you know what? This is a defensive maneuver because I know in the next 5 years we're going to have to do something. Let's make sure that we're not scrambling in year 4 when it comes out, and let's start tracking some stuff right now, kind of do it on our own terms, kind of have a plan in place, and we don't have to, we're not going to have whatever, the third quarter of 2023 thrown off because this thing comes out. We're going to get prepared for it. And then, there's the third layer of it, I call this the compliance version 3.0 layer, is, there's benefit to the company. There's benefit to our mission to make sure we're being fair to people. We're treating people well. And you know what? If you run the numbers and you're already great at it, then you can say, hey, you know what? We're strong here. And you don't have anything to explain. But, there's a lot of evidence that, having good governance makes your business run better. Like performing well on these social metrics of you're not discriminating against people because they're from this town or they grew up this way or they have this background or whatever it is, to leave aside, kind of the big things that people talk about, gender and race and stuff like that. Just being equitable to people probably creates a good culture and a place where people can focus on the work instead of seeing if someone is going to stab them in the back or something like that. That's kind of that third label. You can do the, I'll do it if it keeps me out of jail. You can do the, hey, you know what, let's get started on it and we can do it on our own terms, or you can do it because it's right. But, regardless, I think probably in the next 5 years, you're going to be doing it.
Oh, absolutely. I think it's, even if you don't have the direction, we always tell banks, look, I get the examiners, I get the regulators. They're seen as the antagonist, and in fairness, sometimes they present themselves to be that way.
Yeah,
be the relationship manager with them as well, and begin that dialogue of, look, I know y'all don't have any directives on this, or if you do, can you give me a heads up on it, or or can you tell me a little bit about what we need to be doing? Having those conversations early, to your point of being a little bit more proactive on it. I will say this too. There has been some talk about making sure that our commercial loans to our businesses, that we monitor their ESG and that as part of the credit underwriting.
Right.
What concerns me with that is I'm not, ESG. I like it's a good idea.
Sure.
How do you measure from a risk perspective? How do you measure that?
Yeah, and how do you tie that to loan performance?
Yeah, well, how do you tie that with loan performance? How do you know? How am I supposed to, as a lender, make sure that their board of directors, who have nothing to do with the loan at the underwriting level, it's just they do to some extent, but
sure,
that I've got to monitor that. I don't know how that works. We do a lot with the environment. Again, this may shock people, but when we make a large enough loan that a lot of times the regulators will require us to do an environmental study.
Sure.
You can argue about its efficacy and all that, but we are
something
part of the that underwriting process, particularly for like gas stations. Oh Lord.
Sure. Yeah.
I've had deals blow up because of 100-year-old gas tanks underneath it. But there's all those impacts that would be out there. So I think if that's sort of the metric for the E, for the E on that, we kind of already do that.
Yeah.
But in terms of its our customer societal impact and their governance structure, I don't know how that's going to work.
Yeah.
I don't know how you're going to quantify that.
Yeah. And, I tend to think that we'll figure it out, so to speak, right? Like, you got to, as with anything, right? Like, if your bank is just starting to lend to, commercial real estate for housing, you got to kind of get into it and learn it and figure out what the metrics are and learn from your peers. And then, I don't know, in 3 to 5 years, you have a zone of excellence and you know how to lend to multifamily housing or something, right? Like you got to get into it to learn it, to perform on it, and then make it something that you're good at. So I think as we kind of head toward wrapping up here, I think there's this interesting dynamic on these things, DEI, ESG, pick your alphabet soup, where it's like, well, it's not really clear. No one's telling me what to do. Well, you know what? I mean, we're in business, we're people, we have brains and we have hearts, and we're like, part of why people have jobs is you got to figure something out, right? It's not just, spend time inside a building. Right. So we got to figure out problems. And I think on this stuff, the interesting thing is this has a chance, call it the ESG movement writ large, has a chance to have a little bit of a different tag on it, that it's more ethics than just compliance. It's more, let's figure out this thing that is not just keeping us out of jail, not just forced on us because, the federal government made this regulation, but you know what, when we do this, it has a bunch of positive externalities. It helps us run our business better. It's cleaner. We're not getting caught up in the mud as much. Our employees like it. Our, customers and, borrowers like it and stuff like that. It's going to take some figuring out. And like I said, you can wait until, you're at risk of getting thrown into jail to get started on it, or you can get started now and realize, all right, we're doing some of that. Okay, we can track some of this and see, if over the next 2 years I can see some correlation in my loan performance based on people who are doing this, and start learning about it so that when it becomes official, hopefully you're ahead of the pack and you have a better reputation and you have, better returns on your loan portfolio, or, better, interaction with your customers because of it. But it takes a little bit of that foresight and leadership to say, hey, you know what? I'm not going to make, a massive press release and say that our whole company is doing all of these things in the next 3 months, but we're going to start working on it, trying to figure it out, because it's a challenge that's coming. It's something that we probably should do. It probably should help our reputation, and it's going to take some time to figure it out.
Absolutely. It's going to be interesting to see, I think, from a risk management perspective, what those analytics end up looking like, and how we track those. Like I said, I'm still not sure what those individual, and that's what I mean, what those individual metrics are going to be and how we would track those. But I think it's an interesting academic at this point. I think it'd be an interesting academic study, but absolutely, to your point, don't sit around and wait for it to drop on you. Go and start doing, even if it's wasted effort, quote, I'm doing air quotes.
Yeah, you
wasted effort.
Can't see it return within this month.
Yeah, even if it's, quote, wasted effort, and whatever the metrics aren't what you're doing, you did something, and talk to your regulators, and you did something that to start addressing that. Nobody's going to burn you for doing something that was in anticipation of an initiative like this, unless you keep doing it and don't match up with what the regulators tell you. But nobody's going to burn you for being proactive on this. So go be proactive on it.
That's great. Well, this has been great, Byron. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate you sharing your perspective. I love the reputation bit. I love the community banking aspect, which is, you're a little bit closer, kind of eyeball to eyeball with people. And, you see that cycle of a decision, impact of reputation and how that impacts your business. You see that more closely tied together. So I love that perspective that you've brought. As we wrap up, any last words you want to leave with us, or you want to tell us when your next blues concert is, or what?
Well, I wish I knew when the next blues concert is. No, we actually have our compliance conference coming up, held virtually, on coming up next week. We're recording this on October 18th, so it's the 25th through the 28th.
Cool.
And we've got our registration up at our website, Barret Banking, BARRET banking.org. But I wish I had a good blues concert coming up. No, we're going to be looking at doing some ESG DEI work. I was talking with another one of our Tweezle brethren on Brad Fetterman, and
cool.
he's doing some interesting DEI ESG stuff. And as we get a little closer to getting some sort of guidance on that, we're going to be doing some content around it as well. So stay tuned and follow us on social media to stay informed.
All right.
But yeah.
Sounds
great.
No,
it's coming up, and check that out. I'm sure we'll be doing some webinars and some free bits, some free video clips on LinkedIn from the compliance thing. Some of that's lending and deposit stuff, money going out, money coming in, some of the ethics around some of the compliance issues around that.
Awesome. Well, everyone stay tuned. Check out the Barret School of Banking and follow Byron Earnheart to find out more about this interesting perspective, especially from that community banking angle. I'm your host, Gio Gallo. This podcast is sponsored by Compliance Line, and we appreciate you joining us today on The Ethics Experts. We'll see you next time.